So even after you write it, do you have somebody look it over for you to make sure that it's readable?
Absolutely.
And that, all right, so you have people helping you gather the information, doing the research, and giving you ideas on what should be included. Then afterwards, after you actually put it on paper, who would you ask to read it over?
Well, John read every chapter.
Uh-huh.
I also actually had the book reviewed by a couple of scholars. David Schuyler and William Cronin read drafts of the book, and they're both urban historians. So those were the main reviewers.
But I think that's normal in any process.
Sure.
Especially a novice. I assume this is your first one.
It is my first book. I've been a published journalist for quite a few years before that. I mean, now, you know, today with the internet, another method of approaching publishing a book is to actually publish your work as a blog, and then
really?
have people comment on it and take their feedback. And
what
then
prevents them from stealing your ideas, or your entire book, for that matter?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, that's scary. Okay, yeah.
I mean, I think.
Can you copyright it on the internet?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, that would be interesting to find that out.
Yeah.
Because it's expensive. It's expensive to go through this process.
Absolutely.
And what happens if you don't sell them? Who's obligated to pay the publisher?
Well, the publisher takes a risk.
Oh, the publisher is assuming some of the risk of the cost of printing.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have a contract with the publisher?
Well, I had a contract with
Yeah.
the publisher, and I fulfilled the contract.
Okay.
My terms were to complete the manuscript.
Oh.
Right. And then
So
they went ahead and did the printing and the promotion and the selling of the book at the time it was published. After they got to a certain point with the book, they decided that they were going to unload the copies, and that's when I bought them back.
okay. Well, all right. Now, what's the main thesis of your book?
The book
I haven't had a chance to read it. I've seen it I saw it when it originally came out. And it was one of those things I said in my mind, I really should get that. And then I never did, you know.
And this copy is yours after the
Well, thank you. Yeah.
The book covers 400 years of the city's history and really traces the story of the city's urban forest and changing values about the environment and how that's reflected in the city's landscape. But it's also really takes Worcester as a microcosm of what's been happening to urban forests nationwide, which is that after a period of planting during the 19th century, urban forests around the country have started to decline, and that's what's happened in Worcester.
I was interested when I hit your website, and you described it as the story of Worcester's urban forest, but it's also the story of the insight and sensibilities of the past generation, cultural values, political priorities. And that's so true now about what's going on in the city.
Absolutely. And it's, you know, it's really fascinating to see how the different political alignments over the centuries affected how much money was put into the park system and developing trees. You know, much of the city's urban citizens began planting trees in Worcester in the 1760s. The first person to plant trees here was Elijah Dix, who was the grandfather of Dorothea Dix, who started the mental health movement, the mental health movement. But he was a physician here, and he started planting trees on the common. And the city's first tree ordinance dates back to 1761. The city began planting most of its trees, though, really in the latter part of the 19th century, when Edmund Winslow Lincoln was our first Parks Commissioner, and he really did a tremendous amount to plant the trees and also developed Elm Park and the municipal park system in the city.
And was there a coordinated plan, a vision of what the city was supposed to look like in future generations? Or was it haphazard, a little here, a little there?
That's an interesting question. I think it evolved organically to some extent. There wasn't like a master plan. I mean, the fact that Worcester has sort of has this bipolar structure on Main Street with the courthouse at one end and City Hall at the other is because there were two garrisons originally when the city was first created, when the town was first created.
Oh.
And out of that evolved the landscape that we have now.
Okay, when you say garrison, what do you mean?
protective areas for citizens if they had to retreat.
Okay, because I always think I'm thinking of a fort, you know,
Yeah, like a little
that
fort.
would defend itself against attack, but also
Right.
be part of a countervailing attack.
Right.
Okay. Oh, so there were two forts in town.
There were two
I
forts.
assume to protect everybody from the Indians.
Correct, right,
Ah.
because there had been, I mean, Worcester took 3 times to settle, and there was a lot of conflict between the settlers and the Native Americans here in Herwitz. So, as a result, there were these two garrisons, and that was why the city evolved in the pattern that it did. The municipal park system was planned by the group that was really in charge of the Parks Commission in the last quarter of the 19th century, but it was keying off of what was going on nationally with the creation of Central Park in New York.
Ah, yes, that's right.
Right, and also Rural Cemetery, which was founded in the 1830s, was really the first green open space that was developed in the city, and that was part of the whole rural cemetery movement.
If you had to look back on it, were there any mistakes that the city planners had made, or on the flip side, was there any positive results of their tree planting efforts?
Well, I think the positive was that they had the foresight to really plant a lot of trees in the city and create a beautiful green city, and parks that would enable people from all different backgrounds and all different neighborhoods to have recreation space. Based not just for recreation, but just to commune with nature and have that opportunity. The mistake was the kind of trees that they planted. Lincoln was a big fan of maple trees.
Ah, yes.
He loved them, and he even wrote, I went through 150 years of Parks Commission reports in doing the research for this book. I read every single one of them.
Oh my goodness.
And they're fascinating because Lincoln
Yeah.
was quite a writer, and he had one of his reports talked about the different kinds of trees that he considered planting and what was the best species. And he loved maples because they were beautiful in the fall, particularly sugar maples.
Oh yeah.
So, he also favored elms, but maples even more.
Yeah.
So most of the trees that they set out in the late 19th century were maple trees. The problem there, and the problem with the planting a lot of elm trees, is that you create a monoculture which puts you at risk for infestations like the one that we are experiencing today. You know, the Asian longhorn beetle's favorite tree is the maple tree. And for a variety of reasons, Worcester ended up with an urban forest of publicly owned trees that's 90% maples.
And we've heard that statistic over and over in the last year.
Right,
Yeah.
right, exactly. I mean, we had elm trees before. That was part of the mix, but when the Dutch elm disease came to Worcester in 1951, it came to this country in the 30s. It finally got to Worcester in 51. That was when the first infested elm was discovered, and then 20 years later we didn't have many elms left. And so here we are with the beetles.